welcome to Nursery, a podcast from Ohio's creative voice. From the same minds who brought you Third Class and Bullskit Productions. Check out the music of Third Class at thirdclass.net and the comedy sketches of Bullskit Productions at bullskit.com.
Do you remember we used to hang at the old soda shop? Do you remember hanging at the old soda shop? I knew who you were. You knew who I was at the old soda shop.
January 21st, 2015. Hey Lily, and I'm 30 years old, and you are 65.
Right.
So, so I had my youngest brother Steve on the show, and I asked him and all the other guests the same question: what do you think about Ohio?
Well, I love Ohio. I grew up here, and when I was in college, I decided to leave, and I was in Hartford, Connecticut for 5 years, and then other places, and I didn't live in this area for 18 years. But I came back. Lee's dad came back after 18 years because we missed the maple trees, and we even really like the people around here. I think from living on the East and West Coast, I liked being around people who were more into alternative medicine and health foods and more liberal than people are in this area. Mm-hmm. But what I like, even though I often don't agree with people's opinions, is they just state them and they don't pretend to be somebody else. And yeah. I like it that a lot of the people are close to nature and like to be outside and stuff like that I find valuable. I like it better than living in a big city.
Whenever I do that, I'm just checking the time on it. You're good. That's cool because I said that to somebody about my just very small observations about Seattle and New York. It seemed like. And Seattle's all the people I met there were really creative people, and they're great. But the average person on the street seemed passive, and the average person on the street in New York seemed aggressive. So if Ohio is a place where someone will just tell you how it is, but not be too crazy, that is a plus to the Midwest, where sometimes they are crazy, but. Yeah. You're saying they're straightforward.
Well, I think that people don't usually seem... you can go to the East and West Coast and people are more educated and more interested in cultural things like art and literature than they tend to be around here. But people around here, even when they say obnoxious things, have what I consider good hearts. They would help other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. Yeah, because anytime we've had any incidents in our family or friends where somebody gets hurt or somebody gets sick or anything to that similarity, people around town ask if they're okay. And that's kind of cool because at first you kind of are like, get out of my business, but they're just being a safety net. They're just trying to take care of who's around.
Yeah, sometimes it seems like in small towns people are in your business all the time and they want to know what's going on. And you do have to I feel like you have to protect yourself against that and do what you want to do. But I also think, for example, when your dad died, that I would have had a lot of friends if we were in Portland, Oregon, and they would have done a lot for me. Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't have been strangers coming around and bringing food and doing the whole neighborhood bringing food, the whole neighborhood thinking up things that were helpful.
Right. And they're not doing it because they are trying to have too much of a give and take with you. They're just doing it because they know they can help.
Yeah, and they're not doing it even because they knew me that much. They're just doing it because they just feel like that's what you do for other people that live near you.
They know that they can do to a certain extent, can help with food or help with bringing stuff, they know that they can't sit down and analyze the situation with you if they don't know you. So
Right.
I mean,
Right.
they could, but they don't. They know that food is who's going to be like, why did you make food for me? It's all
Yeah.
fine, or whatever they bring, or if they come over and talk, they're usually just their intentions are pretty clear, and it's pretty hard to mess up a gesture like that. So
Yeah, they
why not?
believe
Yeah.
they can help you. And sometimes you just think like, oh, well, I didn't really want ham, or I
Yeah,
didn't
right.
really want this or that. But
Yeah.
it's their hearts, it's their doing stuff that
Mm-hmm.
touches you.
That's funny you say that, because I made a pizza for Ellen when we first met, and it was bacon, and she wanted ham, or vice versa. And she was like, I didn't want this. That's the wrong pizza. Immediately. And I was like shocked, because it was so early in our relationship that she wouldn't just lie and pretend like it was all good. But it's a quality that I grew to really love in most of the people that we're surrounded by, because you're allowed to say that when you're close.
Yeah,
If it's a neighbor, it's just a gesture.
yeah,
So I kind of started to appreciate that more, because I just came from somebody's funeral to your house, and I didn't know them that well in school, but I knew that if I just showed up and said a couple of things and told a joke or something, that it would probably help them.
you're right.
I didn't say
and that's
it, yeah.
what people know in this area. They know that it helps if you don't even have to say anything, that it helps if you just show support.
Yeah.
And they appreciate that. And you appreciate it when it happens to you, too.
Yeah. Or it was calling hours, not a funeral. But yeah, regardless of what it is, you
Yeah.
appreciate it when it happens to you. They appreciate it when it happens to them. So I agree with you, though. Ohio is good for those reasons. Are there any geographical reasons why you like it? Otherwise,
Well, Connecticut is more like Ohio, but when we lived in Kansas and Oregon, I was totally shocked at how attached I am to the maple trees. And we lived in West Virginia too, and I don't like being surrounded by mountains, and I don't like being surrounded by flat ground. I like maple trees. They're a certain height. They're different than the evergreen trees in Oregon. I don't like winter, but I can't stand to live anywhere that there isn't winter, because I like spring.
yeah, spring in Ohio is really good. What was I going to say to you? Jack went to Arizona and didn't like how open it was.
Yeah.
And missed the maple trees.
I know when we were in Kansas, people said, I know people in Kansas can't stand to be surrounded by trees because they get used to seeing the sky all the time. But I felt totally unprotected, as if
Yeah.
something was going to fly down and snatch me.
Yeah. That's kind of what I got from him too. And then, for some reason, almost every episode I've done of this, I've mentioned Kansas, and it's always just been in passing that it's so beautiful there. But for a whole nother reason, it's just because it's so green in the spring. The grass is green. But it's worth mentioning that Ellen and I went on a road trip 3 years ago and stopped through where you and Dad lived in Kansas and looked at both your guys' campuses where you went to college, and looked at your old apartment and looked at the towns you lived in and explored some other random Kansas things. And definitely, of course I went there with nostalgia, even though I wasn't born there. But I think that genuinely, even if I didn't go there with it, I would have liked certain parts of Kansas a lot, but in a totally different way than Ohio. It's more like a good road trip state. It's not. Did not make me once want to live there. It just made me want to drive there a lot, like drive through and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just like really the pastures with cows they look different than Ohio for some. I don't know.
Yeah, you'd know you were in a completely different place. And they say they have trees, but they're just cottonwood trees, and they're real tiny, and they're like little bushes.
Yeah.
But we went there because your dad was starting naturopathic school, and the first 2 years were at that school. And most of the people going to that school were coming from the East and West Coast. And it was weird because your dad and I ended up being sort of trying to help those people adjust to the Midwest because they were totally in shock.
Yeah.
And most of the people who went there just thought there's no culture. There's no place to go. But there were good museums, and there were... it just isn't the same. But the people were friendly, and I loved the sunshine. The sun was really nice.
Yeah. The culture seems goofy when you look at it first, but not goofy, but just like quaint, I guess, because it's like the museum I saw was a tornado museum, or a museum that showed like photos and stuff from towns that had been wiped out. Mm-hmm. And I thought that you think of it and it sounds stupid, but then you go inside and it's really interesting, of course.
Oh, I don't know.
Because you think about it, it was built on the site where a town was wiped out and then rebuilt completely. So that was cool. And then the world's largest swimming pool is there. That's kind of cheesy, but then taking a look at it is fun. And then the restaurants there are just like sweet barbecue sauce and ribs type places, but they're really good. Like, it's all the culture's there. It's just a different... I don't know, when people go places and say there's no culture, they just mean there's not the culture they want.
Well, there's not... You can't do things nonstop like you do in New York City. Just
Right.
go out to a different place every night and stuff. But when we first moved there was in August of 1978, and it was 115 degrees for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And the wind blows weird and blows the dust around. And I was afraid of the possibility of tornadoes, but nothing ever happened when we were there. They did have snow one winter, and they didn't ever they didn't have anything to plow it, so it was like ice on the road for 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. So that wasn't too nice. But it was a great place for me to do the master's degree in English because I was so scared, and I really didn't know. My grade point average when I graduated with the BA was just a 2.7. And so I couldn't get into graduate school, but they accepted me on probation. And then I got all A's the whole time I was there. And I didn't know I could do the work. Mm. And people were very... I mean, I had... Well, I don't know if you want to hear all this, but I had a really... Definitely. I had Dr. James Berlin was one of my main teachers, and he ended up publishing several books on how to teach college English. Mm-hmm. And he was from Detroit, Michigan, so he was like, he really kind of taught me, and he didn't talk to me personally like you think of people doing, mm-hmm. But he said little things that helped me a lot because he came from a working class background. He said he grew up in the ghetto, and he taught me to sort of see the difference between a working class background and how you can adjust to graduate school. Mm-hmm. But he also taught me a tremendous amount about teaching, and that was the first time, I ever taught.
Yeah. And that was, you said, an internship with
Well,
teaching,
that story, I wanted to go to graduate school, but I didn't want to teach, but I just liked the classes. So once I got in on probation, I was working as a receptionist in a doctor's office. I was working in a daycare, and I heard that they needed a teaching assistant, and it was a little more money than what I was making on these different part-time jobs. So I decided to try it, and then the first day of school, I was really scared. I couldn't sleep, and I didn't think I'd be able to do it, to get up and talk to those students. Mm-hmm. But the first day I saw that all those kids were scared. They were more scared than I was, and they were mostly working-class kids going to Wichita State University. And then from then on, I just loved teaching because I loved being the person that told those kids that was the first that helped those kids that were like me, thinking they couldn't do the work. And I just helped them to be able to do that.
That must be what Steve thinks when he works as a camp counselor a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, you need empathy. You need to remember what you were like and not be like, oh, you should know as much as I do right now. And I was particularly bad. I got D's in my college English classes because I didn't have a clue what they were asking me to do. I only started getting interested after 2 years when I started reading Allen Ginsberg and stuff in my college classes. I wanted to do the reading, but writing I thought was so hard. And that's how my students are even now. It's just like they're so unprepared for college, but I just remember being like that. And I remember wanting to try to do it, but I didn't know what people were asking me to do.
Well, did you find, obviously, I'm sure Kansas was an outlet for you to work harder, too, because you knew less people or whatever, but that was probably always the case with you because you were always going around different places for education or jobs or anything like that. So it's not like, was Kansas especially quiet to allow you to work?
Well,
or not really?
I was over 30, and I was determined, and yes, there was something about not knowing anybody else. Your dad was going to school, and it was like the first time when I did the BA, I was a lot more dedicated than a lot of students were, but I didn't know how to really study. But this time, I took the time, and, the school had a pool. They had an outdoor pool that you could go to.
Was it the world's largest pool?
No, I don't think so. But no, I never heard of that. But I would go there. I would go and swim because I always loved to swim, and it was always hot and sunny. And then I'd study. Like I took summer school, and I did it in 2 years. But I took the summer classes too, and yeah, I just was like, I read everything for every class. I did the papers. I put in hours and hours and hours. And I never knew before that that's how you do it.
Yeah.
But I got all A's, and I graduated with honors in, you have to take comprehensive tests, and you have to defend the master's with an oral defense. And, I mean, it was just I kind of think of it as the best years of my life, those 2 years, because I just never knew before then that I could be, that smart. I always thought I just couldn't do stuff.
Yeah. It sounds like it snapped into place and that you were old enough to get that, too.
Yeah, well, I was taking out loans. I worked my way through for the school and took out loans for the BA, but for the master's degree, being older made a big difference. Yeah. Just being more serious about it.
Well, I know I have a friend who didn't go to college until he was about 26, 27, and he just is getting his bachelor's now, and he's doing so well. Because I think it's simply a little bit because he built it up in his head and came at it really hard because he was so scared.
Yeah.
But mostly he is older and knows how to manage stuff.
I tell my students that, and I know that even from doing the PhD too, because I tell my students that. You're scared in the beginning because you think you can't do it, but then you end up being so much better than the younger students because you're just ready to put in the work. But I was going to say something else, too, that happened to me. I realized I could get A's. Oh, the other thing is, I had never talked. When I was in high school, I was like a little mouse who never said a word in any class. When I did the BA, I didn't ever talk in class. I'd never volunteer to say anything or do anything. But I think it was because I was past 30 and because I just wanted to learn that stuff so much. And I would be, even at 30, I would be older than everybody else in the class. And I just thought, I'm learning this stuff. I don't care what they're doing. They wouldn't read the stuff and they wouldn't talk, and I'd be the only person talking and asking questions. And I never knew before then that you could do that.
Yeah. Well, you and me have that in common at totally different parts of our lives, but I was quiet all through high school and then started talking in college. All through school in general, and started talking after more. I mean, obviously when I was outside of school with my friends I talked, but like you, I didn't know I could just ask anything and not be scared to sound stupid or whatever. It just,
right.
It took me forever to realize that. But one more thing about Kansas, and I know it probably wasn't like that back then, but I found that there were people there who overlapped with West Coast liberal ideals that were because of their farming practices. Like, they would take all the old coffee grounds and use it as fertilizer from a coffee shop, and they would take, like, they'd make their own detergent and stuff, and I'm not saying that's all of Kansas, but there were some things I thought that, like in all places in the U.S., overlapped with interests of somebody who probably would share values of naturopathy or care about culture, not because they did, but just the same kind of, like, don't be wasteful, be environmentally conscious, take care of yourself, and make things homemade and buy local type attitude. You know, like farmers that were kind of what you're probably a lot of people that were transplanted there thought were like know-nothing people, probably had some practices that people would have admired, but no one would ever figure that out, right? Because no one's going to interact like that.
That's interesting. That's interesting because my first response was, oh, I didn't know that many people from Kansas.
Yeah.
But actually, the places I worked before, the daycare I worked at was called Ananda Marga, which was named after, I mean, it had something to do with it was alternative. It was like something to do, that's an Indian name for yoga or something like that. So there were certainly people there doing that. And I do remember, like, that place I worked, that daycare, was like Montessori or something. I learned a lot from just the way they were teaching the kids and what you did there and stuff like that. And then your dad worked, we stayed an extra year because we didn't have money to go out to Portland. So we were married in Wichita, and we both graduated. He finished a BS in science there, but he needed to go on to Portland for 2 more years. And I finished the master's degree in 1980, and then we stayed another year. And worked that year. And he got a job in what was called Mennonite housing. So it was set up by the Mennonites in that area, and there are a big area of Mennonites there. And it was like to help people, you know, they had money, and then your dad and Jack, the guy that... He works as an electrical engineer at Worcester because he grew up in Apple Creek, Ohio. But he and your dad met in Wichita, Kansas.
That's
I can't remember his last name.
Yeah, I can't either. I know who you mean. It'll come to me.
But they met in Kansas, and Jack is a Mennonite, and he, and you know, they're similar to Amish, but a little difference.
Right.
And so they went and did things like put in a new toilet for people who didn't have money for that. So they worked in all the neighborhoods, like outside of Wichita and stuff, to do those kinds of repairs. So when you say that, you think like, well, yeah, those were both things where you're helping people who didn't have money, and so we must have. It seemed like I didn't. You know, but then my students were all, you know, from that area mostly. So. Nobody's that bad there, even in the 70s, to really see. Or sorry, what would have been 80? It was 1970. 1978 to
Yeah,
1981.
Not that you would think Kansas is some evil place either, but like I'm sure it was a little bit nice to know that the students could learn from you quick, and that like the people there weren't as close-minded as you know, like you said, you
It's
spent a lot
not
of
like
your time.
you. People from the East and West Coast, they came there and they just act like, oh, they can't stand them. Well, your dad and I, we sort of try to coach other people because we
Right.
go like, we're used to Ohio, no big deal. But yeah, when you think about it, the people aren't as conservative and.
And you spent all
and-
your time coaching the people that were not from the area, rather than the people that probably you initially thought would need the coaching, which is funny too.
Yeah.
But okay, so then sticking with the travel thing, give me like I know it's hard to condense this stuff, and we can maybe, if you feel like it, do another one down the line where you can flesh these out. But give me a play-by-play. You went when you were younger. You went to Woodstock, and then you did a march on Washington during the Vietnam War. Then give me a play-by-play as far as when you met Dad up till now, just real.
Okay,
as
so
much as
I
you
met
can,
your
yeah.
dad in 1972.
Okay.
And that was just when I came back from Europe. So when I went, 1969 is Woodstock. 1970 is when the students were killed at Kent State.
And you were there for that.
I was a student at Youngstown State, so
Right.
no, I didn't.
No,
I
I'm
wasn't
sorry.
on the campus,
No.
but I did. But sometimes I remember this wrong, but it was actually November 1960. So Woodstock was August 1969. Then November 1969, I went to Washington, D.C. to protest the Vietnam War.
Okay.
Then May 1970, Kent State students were killed, and I went to Washington, D.C. again.
Right.
Because they were protesting because Nixon had said he was going to bomb Cambodia at a time when it seemed like the war was going to wind down, and then he was revving it up again. So, okay, so that's that. Then 1972, Bill and I found out Bill got a scholarship to go to an American school program for a month in Switzerland.
And Bill, just so listeners can follow the narration, is your previous boyfriend to Dad. Is that the best way to describe it?
Right. Bill and I met
And a
at
longtime
Youngstown
friend.
State
Yeah.
when I was 19 and he was 21. And we were together for 5 years. And we decided, he had gone to Europe by himself the summer before. And then we decided June 1972 because he got this lump sum of money for the program. So we flew from New York City to Rome and hitchhiked from Rome down all the way through to southern Italy to Brindisi, where you can get a boat to go to Athens, Greece. And then we hitchhiked from Athens, Greece, up through what used to be Yugoslavia, all along the coast of Dubrovnik and up into Switzerland. Then we stayed in Lugano, Switzerland for a month.
And I pegged you wrong because I told a story when I had my youngest brother on the podcast about you hitchhiking through France, but it was actually that you were picked up by French drivers.
Yeah, and that was in Switzerland.
Yeah.
That was in Yugoslavia,
Right.
because the main hitchhiking we did was all along the coast of Italy and then all along the coast of Yugoslavia up into
Not that it's
Switzerland.
important. Not that that's like so important, but it was an interesting detail because you'd been so many even more places than just that. Actually, you hadn't been there, but
Yeah.
it was just funny because I was like, she hitchhiked through France, and that's all I got out of that story. So that's what's important about recording this is to get it right. You know, like get those stories right.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because we got to go to Europe for 2 months, and we actually only had $400. You could buy a ticket to fly round trip. We each had $400. I could be wrong on this, but I think we spent $200 for a round trip ticket, Rome to New York City and back. and then
Between the two of you?
no, each of
each
us
200.
bought a $200 ticket
Okay.
from Pan America, and they gave us a little flight bag free, and that's what we packed, like just one little shoulder bag.
Uh-huh.
And then I think we each had $200 for food. But once we got to the month-long study program that he was in, that was an interesting thing too, because, well, they let me in for free. I wasn't even like listed as supposed to be there.
Yeah.
And we have free place to stay and all the food we wanted, because it was just like buffet style food.
Oh, cool.
And that was really, like, I was talking to Bill recently, and I said, like, people were doing yoga, people were eating yogurt, people were meditating. There were some famous people there. It doesn't matter who, but they were famous at the time.
Yeah.
We didn't have a clue. We didn't know what yogurt was.
Yeah.
We didn't know what doing yoga was.
We didn't know what yoga was. We didn't know what yogurt was. We didn't know who Yoda was. We didn't know.
I'm just saying.
They had
And
yo-yos.
we're just like, what?
They were playing with these things called yo-yos.
The only thing we didn't get to do was...
Yo-Yo Ma was there. Sorry.
They also, part of the program was to go to places like Salzburg and hear a Mozart concert or something. We didn't get to do any of the side trips because you had to have extra money to do that, so we just stayed there. And then, okay, so that was 1972. We came back. I remember when we were back in August, we were walking past the seminary, the Hartford Seminary Foundation, where Bill went to school and where your dad went to school. And your dad had already graduated with a master's in divinity degree and was working on the maintenance crew there.
Okay.
So he was out mowing, and he was with Pete Henry and Steve Metcalf, who were also working on the maintenance crew.
And those are his longtime friends.
Yeah, and Bill knew Pete Henry. He didn't know your dad, and he didn't know Steve Metcalf at that time.
Right.
But he knew Pete Henry, because they had been in the same class at the seminary.
Mm-hmm.
So they all walked over, and, we didn't say anything or anything. But then... okay, so then I got to know your dad a little bit in 1972 because Bill came back to Ohio and taught college English at Youngstown State for just one semester. He hated it so bad he never did it again. But I was in Hartford and he was in Youngstown. And your dad was working on the maintenance crew, and I was working in the library at the Hartford Seminary, and So we took our breaks at the same time, and we were the only people reading.
Yeah.
And I've told you all that before.
Well, tell me the books real quick.
I was reading Robert Frost, and your dad was reading Octavio Paz. And he came over to me and said, if you're just going to keep reading Robert Frost, you're never going He was interested in writing short stories and read a lot of short stories, and he's reading all these what were called avant-garde little magazines, and he knew about all kinds of people, other countries and stuff that I didn't know anything about. Mm-hmm. So he was telling me, I was like behind the times. Yeah. Because
what were you going to say though? He said if you're going to keep reading that, you're not going to get anywhere.
He just kind of made fun of me because Robert Frost is so traditional and American, and Octavio Paz, I still don't know a whole lot about him, but he is pretty interesting.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so that's your first real encounter.
So that was, so we got to know each other and spent a little time together, but then Bill came, your dad was actually with, he had another girlfriend, and Bill came back that next spring to Hartford, and was kind of traveling around and stuff, and he and I decided, because we could get a bus ticket for $200. Each of us paid $200 to travel on a Greyhound bus for 2 months anywhere in the country and Canada that we wanted to go. So we go, we're going to do that. So we went to the Youngstown Greyhound bus place and bought a ticket, and we mapped out sort of going to lots of people from the seminary were living in different places. Like first we went to Atlanta, Georgia to see friends from the seminary who lived there. Mm-hmm. And then we went other places. I have that all written down where all we went, but we went to Atlanta, Georgia, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and
this was you and who?
Bill.
Just Bill. Okay.
Yeah. And we would try to be on the bus at night and sleep or stay at somebody's house, and we assumed those people were going to feed us. And then we went across Texas and Arizona and out to California because Bill's brother was in California. We stayed there for a little bit. And we went up to Oregon because an old friend of ours from Youngstown State was living in by the Red River, I think it was. And then we took the bus back through. Well, actually, we crossed the country twice. We went to Denver, and we went up into Canada and went all along the lower part of Canada. Mm-hmm. So that was 2 months in the summer of 1973.
Okay.
So what else were... Okay, so then when we came back in 1973, Bill was in Youngstown. I took the last bit of our ticket. We still had one more day. And I went back to Hartford on the bus and called your dad.
Okay.
And said, he says, "Oh, I'll meet you. And then I'll meet you at the bus station." And he came and picked me up. And from then on, we stayed together. Bill and I had really had trouble getting along that well on the bus trip. And we were arguing, and we didn't know if we were he didn't know if he was going to come back to Hartford or what he was going to do. Yeah. So I got an apartment in Hartford by myself. Mm-hmm. And then so what else do you want to know?
So
where your dad and I traveled then? So
you and Bill essentially break up, kind of soft break up.
Yeah.
It's not really super defined, just
right.
when and where. And then you call my dad and tell him you want to hang out with him, and then you end up spending more and more time with him as days go on. Okay,
right.
Cool. And then tell me, give me a rundown.
So your dad and I then lived in. Your dad had been in Hartford. Your dad lived in Hartford for 8 years, and I lived there for 5 years.
Okay.
And then we started living together. I moved into a house on Tremont Street where he had been living before then.
Okay.
And then we decided, well, I don't know if you know this, then your dad was working on a maintenance crew that whole time. So I think that, I said I met him in 1972. We left Hartford in 1976. Okay. So that was 4 years. For some of that time, the seminary was closing down and the buildings were being sold. And they actually packed up the library that I used to work in and moved it. Mm-hmm. And so we were involved in kind of the end of the seminary, and I started working on the maintenance crew. I was like the first woman to work on the maintenance crew, and then they hired somebody else. And we set it all up. A friend of ours he was trained to do all this stuff, and he was teaching us how to fix sinks and toilets, because that's what we had to do, because there were all these apartments and dormitories and stuff like that. But we wanted it to be a employee driven, everybody mm-hmm. shared the responsibilities. Mm-hmm. So we were involved in teaching each other, and we wrote up this big thing about how to do it all and stuff. And in the process of that, we also, which was by 1975, a lot of people were doing this, ordering health food in bulk, and we'd order as a group and split it up and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But by 1976, your dad and I decided we wanted to leave because we wanted to come back to Ohio. We wanted to be near our families. But what we ended up doing, we packed up, we bought the Chevy carryall, and we packed it up, got rid of tons of stuff, tons of books too, but we packed it up with all we had was what was in that truck, and the St. Bernard and the cat. And we drove across, we left Hartford, and we drove to Buchanan, West Virginia, because that's where Ed Piper lived, and he was a friend of your dad's from Worcester.
Okay.
And we went there, and he introduced us to a guy who wanted somebody to stay at their house. And he had, like, it was West Virginia, it was French Creek, West Virginia, 30 miles from Buchanan. And that's where we lived with no running water, electricity, or what else? We just had a little pot-belly stove that we cooked on and heated with, and we stayed there 1976 to 1977 through that winter. Chopped wood and had a huge garden, and we were like out in the middle of nowhere. Then your dad had kind of thought about studying naturopathy because he had heard about it in Hartford on a radio program. And then in West Virginia, he started asking about the schools and got information about it. So he found out that he needed to take more science courses. So that's when we moved from, first we moved from West Virginia to Hiram, Ohio. Because your dad needed to take science courses in order to get into the BS program at NCNM. So he took organic chemistry and stuff at Kent State. In Hiram, we lived in a cottage that was owned by Aunt Leanne's husband's aunt, Bill Heller's aunt.
Okay.
And so we just stayed there like April 1976 to October 1977. Then we moved into Kent to that little barbershop.
Really tiny house that now is not.
It was just one room, and it's not there anymore, but we rented there. And then...
That's when you were drinking like 9 cups of coffee a day.
Oh, yeah.
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 Which is crazy to me.
No, we weren't then.
Oh, that wasn't
No,
then.
because it was... When I lived with him on Tremont Street, it was 1974, beginning of that year, we stopped... I think we did it somehow.
Oh, you stopped
In January, we stopped drinking alcohol. In February, we stopped drinking caffeine. In March, he had to stop smoking. And March or April, we stopped eating meat.
Yeah, okay.
So that was 1974. So, yeah, that was when we stopped drinking coffee. So we did... I think I remember drinking a little coffee when we were in West Virginia, but we had not. No, it was only like the first couple years we were together that your dad was in the habit of making a big pot of coffee, and then we just would take a thermos and drink 10 cups a day.
Okay, so then after Kent, then is Portland next?
No, because from Kent, he found out about the school, he got accepted. And the way it was set up was you go 2 years in Wichita, Kansas, and 2 years in Portland, Oregon. So, yeah, we drove that carry-all truck from Kent, Ohio to Wichita, Kansas. Got an apartment there, stayed there ended up being 3 years. And then from there we drove to Portland, Oregon, and lived in Portland for 3 years.
I saw a film, it was of Mom when she was young. She was with Dad and it looked like they had a good amount of fun. They were in Portland and I don't remember why. I sat down on the couch and watched, and I began to cry.
Wichita, we got married in 1980, and then we went out to Portland, and
Dad went to went to school for naturopathy there.
Yeah.
And then I recently took a trip out there in 2014, October, and went and found out the place you guys live. Same thing as Kansas. I went and found where you guys went to live, where he went to school, and a couple other things you told me to look at, and took photos there. I found the hospital I was born at, took a photo, and that was really cool for me. So then that's 84. Then you guys drove straight to Ohio after I was born, right? Very soon after.
June 1984, we left Portland. It took a lot of courage to do that. Your dad had graduated. He had taught for a year at the school.
And I was born January of that year. So
yeah,
you were there a few months.
Yeah, so you were... Well, maybe I would say June, but it seemed... I think that's right. Mm-hmm. Anyways, we didn't go... First, we went to those friends in Illinois, Peoria, Illinois. Dancy's, Bert and Tina Dancy. We stayed there for a night. We stopped in Wichita again and saw some of our friends from there, and then we went to Illinois, and then we went up to Wisconsin to Aunt Leanne's house with you. Before then, we went to Grandma and Grandpa Boyle's house in Medina, and then we came to Columbiana.
Okay.
And stay.
And then years go by.
Then August 1984, we rented the place on
West North.
West North.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then that place you rented, to give people an idea, is East Palestine, Ohio, a town I talk a lot about. It's on the PA border, Ohio-PA border. You and Dad rent that. I was born already. Then you have Jack in 86. You have Steve in 89. And then 88.
No,
89. 89, I'm sorry. I don't know. I got that mixed up. And then 1993, October, Dad dies of cancer, and but before that, he gets his practice going by himself. He's laid off from another doctor who has him practicing as a practicing doctor there, and then he starts his own business, which serves people in East Palestine with herbal remedies, chiropractic remedies, and couple other small things, right? This and that. Massage therapy. Hypnosis therapy, I knew was something that once in a while he used, which was just that little machine.
I don't think... We didn't call it hypnosis.
Oh, that wasn't hypnosis?
That
then?
machine...
What is that?
Well, the big thing that...
Yeah, that big thing you stick your head in.
It was called... I looked it up. I saw online. You can see a picture of it.
Hypnotherapy?
Because I couldn't... No, it's light. It's light therapy. So the
I
idea
remember.
behind
I
it
remember
was...
as a kid.
Yeah, I don't think he ever did... I don't think hypnosis was ever a part of what he did.
No, that's something I just created in my head. Because I wrote a song about that.
Old machines inside the garage, they sometimes hypnotize me.
But that machine was, people would lay under it, and you could change it to different colors of light.
Yeah,
because there's a whole theory. And I have a book or so about it, about what the influence of light is. And that was before people knew as much as they do now about the light deprivation in the wintertime.
Yeah, actually, I just said, I did a podcast earlier today with, if you remember, Edwina.
Yeah.
And I actually said to talk to her about seasonal affective disorder. She didn't say she had it. I just brought it up because she, like us, came up in a life where she had a emphasis on nutrition, emphasis on conservation, environmental conservation. So she kind of touched along the same thing. Okay, so he dies in 1993. I'm 9. Jack's 7. Steve is 4.
Now you are somewhere in some small town up in the clouds, in some drawing where I drew things that looked like heaven when I was 7. You're on a page.
You raise us in this house because we moved to another house just a block away, basically. It was quite a bit bigger, up on a hill, you told me that when you and Dad decided to make the purchase that it was one of those like, let's not buy anything else the rest of our lives. We'll buy this. This will be our thing we spoil ourselves with. We'll get a big house.
Well, we had never bought a house.
No.
We were renting for 7 years
everything.
on West North.
Right.
And so we were looking to buy, but we never imagined buying anything like this. And we didn't even really think we'd get okayed for the loan.
Yeah.
And we knew, even though the bank told us we could pay for it, we knew we wouldn't have money for the furniture. But we said we were buying it, we'd have space. We'd have space for our kids. Mm-hmm. And we didn't care if we didn't have furniture and stuff. So.
Yeah. Which is kind of a nice theme because
we never did have furniture.
Yeah, all of us kind of have lived like that. In a way, like
partly.
me and Ellen only had a mattress up until this last year. You only have that now as your room still.
Yeah.
There's books everywhere, but for the most part, we haven't really fluffed up anything with too many extra pillows or drapery or anything like that. And that's kind of a nice basic attitude to have when you're trying to be economic in other things. Not having a big house, we were lucky to grow up in, obviously, but I think you've held to that to an extent.
Yeah, well, it was a little more extreme because your dad would have made more money, and most people would have sold. And I was told by financial advisor and everybody, you got to get out of that house. Yeah. And
me and Steve, I talked about that on the podcast.
Well, I don't mean even now.
I know that was way
even
earlier.
now, but this was like right after he died. Most people would have sold the house immediately. Right. But again, I thought it was important to try to keep it the same for you guys. So.
Yeah, which probably was good. I mean, we ended up starting a band in this house.
Oh, how my father was.
House. We ended up writing lots of skits in this house, and writing lots of stories, and doing lots of homework for English classes and things like that, and developing lots of ideas.
About the concerts.
Tons of concerts. I just had Icarus Flu on yesterday. We talked all about that.
Oh, really?
He just talked about you mostly. He was like, your mom let us do that. That was his.
Did he talk about how I knocked the mirror off his car?
No. I didn't know that.
He was parked in our driveway, and I just backed out right alongside his car and knocked his mirror off.
And he was probably real nice about
it.
Yeah. He probably was like, well, you let us destroy your house, so that's okay. Yeah. Not him personally. But yeah, he's talked about how unbelievable it was that you let us have the shows here. We both were talking about how great that was.
Do you know this story? Like the first time you had the show, Bill McDonough happened to call me, and he heard the noise in the background. He goes, "What are you doing?" And I go, "Oh, my kids are having a show." He says, "What do you?" He just started yelling, yelling at me, like, "What do you think you're doing? They're going to be drinking. They're going to tear the whole house apart. What do you?"
But you gave us a really long runway of a place where we could bounce ideas off the wall, literally, sometimes in the house. Like, it was a real long runway to have our shows here before we played at bars.
It turned out, I think, to be a really good thing. It was good for me. But I know, I was scared.
Yeah, and I
wasn't as relaxed about it as it seems now like I was. Because,
right.
But it worked out to be, I'm so glad I did that,
And the worst thing that ever happened here, there was drinking, there were things like that of that nature, but at a show in particular, the worst thing that ever happened is one of our friends punched another friend.
In our living room.
And I know at the time it was scary, but man, that's pretty lucky.
I know.
If there were any police, they would stop and say what's happening for a second and leave.
Yeah.
And there wasn't somebody like. Though we've had problems with family and friends with drinking and stuff for sure, and problems with people with alcohol poisoning in various walks of small town life and people that we know, the shows never spawned that.
Nobody
that was always like
nobody
people
was
there.
tearing up or being stupid.
That's always been
Yeah.
like people were there to listen. They bought
Yeah.
a CD or bought a cassette. Well, we didn't have cassette, but whatever, T-shirt.
One of
whatever.
my favorite stories is like, because you guys would go around. I think for this one show, I won't remember what year that was, but that you went around and knocked on the neighbors' doors and invited them to come.
Oh, really?
Went across the street and asked Rose Castiglia. She told me this, like you knocked on her door and said, "Do you want to come over to our concert?" And she said, of course she was 70, but she said, "No, I'm sure I'll be able to hear it."
Yeah. Because, again...
She always laughs when she tells me that story because she thought it was so funny that
Isn't
you
it funny
invited
that I don't remember that very well? Like, it's not really
well,
that long
I
ago.
remember that you put signs in the yard and you put signs on the mailbox, and you might have put a sign on her mailbox.
In that regard, not much has changed about me personally, because I just go around putting flyers up and say, "There's a third class show here, we're going here," and stuff. But still, it's interesting to think that any events in our lives that might have been dramatic or like maybe like hurt maybe somebody we know would have got hurt, or if we disturbed somebody else with our noise, it was never, the house shows themselves were very much so like just straightforward and fun. It was like we got the police called on us when we rehearsed in the morning or something, or we got police called on us if we were outside yelling, running around at some other time playing football or whatever we're doing. Maybe that's not really right, but you know what I mean. We get the police calling us in the daytime, but nighttime it was like small enough town that we'd either go knock on people's doors and they'd know what to expect, or their kid was there. Yeah. And so that's what's good about small towns.
Well, I remember some of the concerts. I remember one or two people, the parent would come to the door to make sure there was an adult here before they dropped off the kid. But,
but that kind of was this thing that I think is very notable about the Northeast Ohio, is that there was like this kind of punk living room basement show thing happening with kids that age, and that still happens now. But that was like a notable thing about Columbiana, that there were like basement shows in churches and like living room shows quite a bit, often because it was a pre-internet type of thing. In most cases, where it was just kind of reaching out a long arm and gathering around everyone in the neighborhood to come over. In a sense. So that was kind of fun.
I remember, one thing I remember being shocked about is Ron Dunham driving his motorcycle up in our backyard with his girlfriend on the back. Like, I'm like, oh no, because I could hear it was so loud.
Yeah, he did that there. And he did that when
when
we played at Derek Braden's house. And he, for listeners that don't, I know that some of you guys listening don't know who any of us are, but that guy's a guy who was in my graduating class and unfortunately died in a motorcycle accident in East Palestine. But he was one of those guys that you thought was going to be... He was one of those guys that was a little bit intimidating to some of us, like geek-type guys. Some people don't think of him as intimidating, but he was just a big guy who looked like he was going to be real firm with you, but oftentimes he was a real softie.
Yeah,
like he was like
really friendly.
Yeah, he was just like, I like your band a lot, man. He was like one of the first people that believed in us at a time where it was so easy for people to be like, you suck. Yeah. Man, you guys suck. You just started it. Like, so I always kind of liked him for that. Him and Josh Foster were people that were kind of like, initially like, we could start a record company in our house and it'll be, just like BS talk, all of us acting like we could be these famous DJ producer type, whatever, rap, rock, whatever. Yeah. I don't know what it was, but they were two of the most unlikely but most supportive people in our lives. And, but on that note, I was going to ask you, okay, this is I'm going to skip the what religion are you question. I ask everybody that. I know that you're open and you're, and we were raised kind of semi-Methodist, and you could call yourself Unitarian. You could call yourself
your dad's
Universalist.
grandfather and your great-grandfather was a Methodist minister. So all the Boyles, Grandpa Boyle's dad was a Methodist minister. Yeah. So they were very serious about their religion. And Grandma and Grandpa stayed with the Methodist Church. And when your dad and I decided we wanted to expose you to some traditional religion, and you would have your choice about breaking away from it, but we thought it was better to do that. We had friends in West Virginia who were raised atheists, and they became Jehovah's Witnesses. And we had talked to them a lot, and we thought, well, it's better to give them a little introduction into it, and then they can choose what they want. But, I was raised Lutheran, and then I totally was probably considered myself an atheist for 20 years.
Sure.
And then I got back to the church, but I feel pretty comfortable with Methodists because, especially now, it's not like when I was a kid. They kind of let you be, and if you want to just believe in a higher power, then
They're
it
like,
doesn't
they're
have.
like
It's not like
universalists.
they're different. They're different. Methodists. Well, the Lutherans always made fun of the Methodists because we always said they didn't know what they really believed because they're so open and more.
Right.
Where the Lutherans would be back then. Of course, we're talking about the early '60s, telling everybody what they should believe.
Right. And the only reason I didn't mean to skip the question because I didn't think your answer would be interesting. I just know that, like, most of the people my age I interview give a very open answer. And I think that comes from your generation directly, questioning it. So that it's not so much that people's convictions are have been lost. It's just that, like, religion is a little bit more like, I don't know, communal, regardless of the religion, to my generation because of yours. So, like, I expect an open answer from you like that, where you're like comfortable with Methodists, but recreational is the word. Sometimes I think church spirituality in an environment in a town is oftentimes recreational, and it's something that serves as a vehicle.
Oh, you mean you go to meet other people and do stuff?
Yeah, and it serves as a vehicle for them to bring you food when Dad died.
Yeah.
Or it's like there's people from your church, but they're not there because you're a Methodist and they're a Methodist.
Right.
That was just a jumping off point. They're there because they like you.
Right.
But not to belittle it. Okay, and then last two questions. What do you think of when you hear the word nursery?
Well, I know that Ellen's parents own a nursery, but I usually think of babies related to nurseries more than trees.
Do you think of the pink room at all that was in our old house that Steve was in?
No, we never referred to it as the nursery.
Yeah, people don't anymore. I mentioned that. No one says that anymore.
No, we never did, and we wouldn't have had that room pink if we had.
Yeah, that was.
We never changed things, but yeah. Is that what you think of?
The song kind of has eclipsed it. That we have that song, and our friend Mike suggested if Ellen ever was down the road when she's older to open a bakery or cafe, kind of in the vein of what Peppy's doing, but like in a building with coffee and more stuff.
Yeah.
Like that, she should call it Nursery. So I have all this jumbled mess in my head now. Like that song plays. I have a storefront in my head. I think of Ellen's business. I think of Steve says he thinks of church rooms where they were while the service was happening.
True,
basement.
I would think of that.
Yeah. There's all kinds
I
of
didn't
things,
think of that, but that, we used to always say that, and Steve probably remembers spending time there where the kids would all go to the nursery during the sermon.
Yeah. And so
that's where I've heard the word used more.
Is that surprisingly, I think nursery is a general term that applies to this podcast, and that we incubate some ideas and conversations, and then somewhere halfway through most of the conversations it starts to kind of take some form and have a little bit of a theme, and like, Kansas is big in this one, and like travel, of course, with you is a big one, and like I think that like I liked the name for this one for this podcast just because I think of it as a place to breed conversation.
Oh yeah,
and
that's good.
And it's not really that; it's pretty abstract, but it just seemed to fit for some reason.
I think that's nice.
And okay, last thing: if you had one song only to listen to at the if you were on an island by yourself for the rest of your life, you could turn it off, turn it on, but it would always be there for you. But it would only be one. Do you have a good answer for that?
Am I supposed to name a third class song?
No. Unless that would help you as far as like, because you'd be hearing voices of your sons. But you should probably name something that would have a little bit more staying power. That's no rag on my band. But you might either pick a longer song or a song that's farther removed so that you'll have more interest. You know our songs back to front sometimes when you hear them so often. You might want to choose something from when you're a kid.
Well, I think what I would choose is Mozart. And I didn't know anything about classical music when I was a kid, and I took piano lessons for 6 years, and some of it was classical music. Anyways, I find Mozart comforting. The first time I ever heard him was when Bill bought me a record album, and it was, I'm not going to remember the name of it. So it would probably be that, but I can't remember the name of it. Or Mozart wrote a Requiem right before he died. I think he was only 20. He was very young. And that's very nice. Something like that would be.
Ellen said similar. Yeah, she said classical music would definitely be her thing.
Yeah.
And then okay, so I think we got a lot. If there's anything you ever want to pick up on after this and we do it again, if there's a specific story you want to tell, I just thought it was nice that you kind of gave a timeline in this one that like told that thing. Can you say our little sign-off thing? It's usually actually addressed to you, but it's look, Mom, we're on a podcast.
That's what it says?
That's what we say at the end of it. So can you say that for the end of this?
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Look, Mom, we're on a podcast.
That's good. Thanks.
Well, I wanted to say something else.
Okay.
I never thought I would talk that much.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to have those dates and stuff because I see how confused it is for you guys because I'll name these things and stuff. So it's neat.
And you were older than I am now for half that story. So, of course, it's like hard for me to keep track of. That's what the point of recording it is. For
oh,
sure.
yeah, I know. I wish I had recorded my parents, because now I can't remember half of what they told me.
Yeah. So hopefully this serves as that for me personally, but it probably serves to any random listener as like just a relatable, fun thing to see somebody's outlook on travel and growing up in America. So see you guys later.